He walked into courtroom 7, expecting to be convicted. That was the plan. The suit was $62 from a discount rack, deliberately a size too small across the shoulders, bought with cash from a strip mall 3 towns over. The briefcase was faux leather, peeling at the corners. Everything about Marcus Webb that Tuesday morning was engineered to communicate the same thing: a man with nothing, no money, no attorney, no options, no one coming. Officer Cole Britten would see exactly what Marcus needed him to see. What Britten would not see, what he was constitutionally, professionally, and temperamentally incapable of seeing, was that the man he was about to perjure himself against had completed 4 combat deployments across 3 continents, held a Tier 1 hand-to-hand combat instructor certification from the United States Navy, and had spent the last 7 months coordinating with the FBI Public Corruption Unit on an operation built entirely around one name, Cole Britten. By the time the morning session ended, the most feared officer in Crestwood County would leave that courtroom in his own handcuffs. He just didn't know it yet. The Crestwood County Superior Courthouse smelled of burned coffee from the hallway machine floor polish, applied in overlapping circles by someone who had stopped caring about the corners and the particular institutional defeat of a room that processed human misfortune at scale and had long since run out of surprise about it. Marcus arrived at 8:43, 17 minutes before the session, signed in at the security desk. His federal clearance handled on a list the desk officer didn't ask about, and made his way to courtroom 7 on the 2nd floor. He took the 2nd row of the gallery, not the first, which would have made him visible to the bench and invited early scrutiny, not the 3rd, which would have required passing other people when he stood. He sat with the easy, unremarkable stillness of a man who was early for something he had no particular feeling about. The gallery filled around him. A woman in her mid-40s with a grocery store employee badge, Crestwood Food Mart, the orange and white logo still pinned to her jacket, like she'd come straight from a shift, sat at the end of his row and looked at her phone without reading it. 2 young men in their early 20s came in together and took seats across the aisle, their mothers flanking them with the careful posture of women who had learned to take up as little space as possible in rooms like this. An elderly man in a fleece-lined windbreaker settled into the row ahead and was asleep before the session opened. Marcus looked at the woman with the grocery badge. Her name was Patricia Odom. He knew this because she was in the complaint record. 5 years ago, Patricia Odom had filed an excessive force complaint against Officer Cole Britten after a traffic stop on Millbrook Avenue that left her with a sprained wrist and $140 in cash missing from her glove compartment. The complaint had been reviewed by the Internal Affairs Division. It had been closed in 8 days. Patricia Odom had never received a follow-up call. She was one of 17. Marcus looked back at the courtroom's ceiling plaster crown, molding a water stain shaped roughly like the state of Ohio fluorescent lighting that flattened everything it touched and let the room continue arriving around him. He thought about Darnell. His brother was 22 years old, pre-med at Crestwood State, partial academic scholarship weekend shifts at a grocery distribution center for the rest. Darnell was the kind of person who made study guides for other people without being asked, who had a laugh big enough to reorganize the atmosphere of a room, who sent their mother voice notes on her birthday that ran 6 or 7 minutes long because he always thought of one more thing he needed to say. 6 months ago, on a Tuesday evening at 11:15, Darnell had been driving home along Millbrook Avenue from a study group. He had his phone in the cup holder. On the screen was an unread email from the Caldwell Institute for Biomedical Research in Atlanta, confirming his acceptance to their summer research fellowship, the one he had applied to 3 times, the one he had stayed up until 2 in the morning for 6 consecutive nights, preparing the application for. He hadn't opened it yet. He was saving it for when he got home, so he could call their mother and read it aloud on speaker. He never got to open it. Headlights appeared in his rearview mirror and stayed there. He pulled over. He did everything correctly. Window down, dome light on both hands at 10 and 2 fingers spread. He was wearing his Crestwood State hoodie and the reading glasses he'd recently started needing for close work. His textbooks were stacked on the passenger seat. What happened in the next 9 minutes was in the hospital report. Fractured orbital socket. Ruptured right eardrum from the impact of his head against the asphalt. Contusions on both forearms consistent with a defensive posture. He had spent 4 days at Crestwood Regional, missed 6 weeks of coursework, lost his spot in a lab group that had been the center of his academic year. He never opened the fellowship email until 3 weeks later from his mother's couch, with his jaw still partially wired and his right ear still producing a sound like radio static in a closed room. The fellowship had already filled his spot. The internal affairs review was completed in 11 days. 0 independent witnesses interviewed. Case closed. Marcus had been in Mali when his mother called. He had stood in a forward operating base that smelled of diesel and red dust and listened to her voice and been very still for a long time. Then he had asked to speak to Darnell, and Darnell, with his jaw wired and his words coming out sideways, had said, "Don't do anything. Marcus, I'm fine. It's fine, these things happen." And Marcus had said quietly that he understood. He had not said he agreed. It took 4 months to locate the right federal contact, and 3 more to build the legal and operational architecture around what Marcus was proposing. He insisted on one condition: before he would sign anything, the investigation had to reach wide enough to touch the IAD supervisor who had closed Darnell's file in 11 days without interviewing a single witness. His name was Deputy Chief Warren Holt. The FBI told Marcus that Holt's financials were already a secondary target. Marcus said good. He signed. The vehicle he had been driving the night of the original stop, a 2023 Lexus GS dark blue, registered to a federal alias, was a bait car. 4 concealed 4K recording devices. Biometric contact sensors embedded in the steering wheel column. A direct encrypted uplink to an FBI surveillance van parked on Ketterly Street, 3 blocks from the intersection of Millbrook and Grant. The van had been staffed for 8 hours the night of the stop, waiting for Britten's pattern to engage. It had taken 11 minutes. The case file in Marcus's lap read, State versus Marcus Webb, charges resisting arrest, failure to comply. Assault on a police officer. All fabricated, all exactly according to plan. He had allowed himself to be arrested, processed, charged, and scheduled for trial, because a trial required Britten to take the stand, and Britten on the stand under cross-examination was the end of the operation. Marcus looked at the courtroom's clock. 8:58. He breathed 4 counts in, 4 counts out. He thought about Darnell's fellowship email sitting unread in a cup holder at 11:15 on a Tuesday, waiting to be something wonderful. He thought about what it cost a person to do everything right and still end up on the asphalt. He thought not much longer now. The bailiff, a younger man whose nameplate read R. Garrison, called the room to order at 9 sharp. Judge Ruth Calloway entered from her chambers. She was a black woman in her 60s, with close-cropped silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the expression of a person who had long ago stopped being surprised by the varieties of human failure that arrived in this room and had redirected her energy entirely toward managing them efficiently. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the morning calendar, and opened the session. When Marcus's case was called, he stood, smoothed his jacket across his shoulders, noting the fabric's resistance, the deliberate inadequacy of it, and walked through the low wooden swinging gate toward the defense table. Alone. No public defender. No private attorney. Pro se. The optics were essential. A man representing himself unprotected, improvising. Everything about him had to read as ordinary. At the prosecution's table sat ADA Dana Whitfield, late 30s, competent. The kind of attorney who ran clean cases on the reliable premise that Crestwood juries trusted police officers and that had historically been sufficient. She was reviewing her notes without looking up, and in the gallery's front row waiting to be called, sat Cole Britten. Marcus had studied Britten's file with the thoroughness he applied to targets. He knew the man's shift history, his complaint record, 17 in 11 years, 13 involving unarmed black men, his 4-year tenure as a union representative, his habit of arriving early to courtrooms to work the space before sessions, building his familiar authority presence in rooms that would later render verdicts about him. He knew that Britten was 41 years old, had played semi-professional football before a knee injury, and that the city of Crestwood had paid out $780,000 in civil settlements on his behalf without once formally disciplining him. He also knew what Britten didn't know, that the quiet man at the defense table had operated in 4 war zones, held a Tier 1 hand-to-hand combat certification, and had spent 7 months constructing the room they were both sitting in. Britten looked at Marcus from across the courtroom. The look was ownership, the casual survey of a man assessing something he had already decided belonged to him. He let it sit for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. That was fine. That was perfect. The predator had to feel completely at ease. Judge Calloway addressed Marcus with the frank skepticism she reserved for pro se defendants, a skepticism born not from condescension, but from watching too many people navigate this room alone and emerge worse. Mr. Webb, you are still electing to proceed without counsel. I want it on the record that I advised against this at arraignment. Are you certain I am your honor? Calloway studied him one extra beat. Then she turned to the prosecution. Ms. Whitfield, call your witness. The state calls Officer Cole Britten. Britten rose and walked to the stand with the rolling weight-forward gait of a large man who had never been required to make himself smaller. He passed the defense table, and his duty belt's clasp struck the corner of Marcus's table, a small, deliberate territorial mark. Marcus did not blink. He was already writing the date at the top of his legal pad. Britten took the witness chair and claimed it, immediately leaning back, arm over the rail legs, spread to the width of the box. He had occupied this chair many times. He considered it his. Under Whitfield's direct examination, he was fluent and practiced. He testified that on the night of October 19th, he had observed Marcus's vehicle on Millbrook Avenue run the red light at the intersection of Millbrook and Grant. He had initiated a traffic stop. The defendant was immediately uncooperative, refused to provide his license, stepped out of the vehicle aggressively with fists clenched. He had issued 3 verbal commands. The defendant refused all 3. When he moved to restrain the defendant for officer safety, the defendant shoved him backward with both hands. He deployed his taser. Even on the ground, the defendant continued to resist. You don't know what it's like out there, Your Honor, Britten said at one point, looking directly at the judge with the slightly sorrowful expression of a man describing an occupational hazard. You try to do everything by the book, and sometimes the situation forces your hand. The gallery absorbed this with the passive familiarity of a room that had heard the same story attached to different names and had learned across years and at considerable personal cost that it almost always ended the same way. Patricia Odom at the end of Marcus's row looked at her hands. Marcus let the testimony wash past him without writing anything down. He had drafted Britten's likely testimony himself months ago in a conference room in an FBI field office. The actual version matched his projection with 90% accuracy. The remaining 10%, a small embellishment about the number of verbal commands, was noted and useful. When Whitfield finished and sat, Judge Calloway looked at Marcus. Your witness, Mr. Webb. Marcus stood. He picked up his legal pad and pen. He walked to the podium without hurrying, set the pad on its surface, and looked at Cole Britten. 2 seconds of silence. Then he began. His first question was about the timeline. Britten had testified that the stop occurred at 11:52 p.m. Marcus asked him to confirm. Britten confirmed it with the confident ease of a man reading from a prepared text. Marcus asked him to confirm the precise location intersection of Millbrook and Grant. Confirmed. Officer Britten Marcus said, Your vehicle's onboard computer logs your location in real time through the department's GPS dispatch system. Is that correct? It is. Defense Exhibit A is a certified data export from that system subpoenaed directly from the Crestwood Metro PD Dispatch Records Office. Marcus approached the clerk, submitted the document, provided Whitfield's copy. Your shift log shows you radio dispatch from the intersection of Halston Road and Pemberton Boulevard at 11:49 p.m. that same evening. That location is 2.3 miles from the intersection of Millbrook and Grant. Could you explain to the court how you observed my vehicle run a red light at Millbrook and Grant at 11:52 p.m. when your own department's records place you 2.3 miles away 3 minutes earlier? The question landed and sat. Britton's jaw slid to the side, once slow, a grinding motion that Marcus had been watching for since the man took the stand. His hand found the arm of the witness box. Timestamps can have lag, he said. The system isn't perfectly synchronized. Marcus wrote a small check mark on his legal pad. He moved on without argument. He did not push on the timeline. He didn't need to. The number lived in the room now, and everyone in the room would be carrying it. Defense Exhibit B, Marcus said, is footage from an ATM camera belonging to the Crestwood Community Credit Union, mounted on the exterior wall at the corner of Millbrook Avenue and Grant Street. The footage covers the entirety of the stop in question. I have provided a copy to the district attorney's office as required. Whitfield had not reviewed the footage. She had received the notice of its existence 3 days ago, and based on everything she expected this case to be, had not prioritized it. The bailiff set up the monitor on Calloway's instruction. The footage was high-definition color for the first segment, then shifted to infrared, resolution sharp enough to read the numbers on Britton's badge at standard playback. What the gallery watched Marcus's vehicle arriving at the red light at Millbrook and Grant, coming to a complete stop, both wheels behind the white line, the car sitting still as the light held red. Then from the upper left corner of the frame, Britton's cruiser appearing not positioned as a monitoring vehicle, not approaching with lights, but sliding in close and fast from behind the angle of a vehicle that had been following at reduced distance and closed the gap when the opportunity presented. The light turned green. Marcus's vehicle did not move for 2 seconds. Britton's door opened. No emergency lights. No PA system. He walked directly to the driver's side. Marcus's window was already down, unambiguously down, clearly visible on the footage before Britton reached the door. Marcus's hands were on the steering wheel. Britton circled the vehicle. A full circuit. He was not assessing a threat. He was checking whether anyone was watching. He returned to the driver's side, grabbed the handle, and pulled the door open. The courtroom heard the sound of the door on the audio track. What followed took 4 seconds. Britton reached in, took Marcus by the collar of his jacket, and hauled him out onto the asphalt. Marcus's hands were open and raised, visible throughout, as he went down. Britton's knee came to his upper back. The taser wire deployed from approximately 8 inches. The courtroom was silent. Not the silence of shock, the silence of recognition. The silence of a room in which something everyone had suspected or experienced or been told about and not believed had just been presented as indisputable documentary fact on a county record monitor. Patricia Odom, at the end of the row, had both hands pressed flat against her thighs. She was looking at the screen with an expression that had nothing in it that was new. Only the particular exhaustion of confirmation, of being right about something you spent 5 years hoping you were wrong about. Judge Calloway had removed her reading glasses. Marcus did not look at the monitor. He looked at Cole Britten. Britten was gripping the witness box rail with both hands. His knuckles were pale. The jaw grinding had accelerated to a visible involuntary rhythm. His face was cycling through colors, the red of controlled authority, dissolving into something mottled and less governed. Officer Britten Marcus said, his voice carrying the same measured, unhurried quality it had held since he stood at the podium. Would you like to revise any part of your sworn testimony? The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of a specific and irreversible thing, a lie meeting the outer limit of how far it could travel before the structure gave way. Britten's eyes moved from the frozen frame on the monitor to Judge Calloway's face, to Marcus's face, and in each direction found an absence of what he was accustomed to receiving in this room: deference. Nobody was looking away. Nobody was giving him room to recover. "The angle," Britten said. The baritone had flattened a voice trying to maintain its register against a current pulling the other direction. "The angle is misleading. It doesn't show the full context. It doesn't show him reaching under the seat before I opened the door." Marcus tilted his head approximately 3 degrees. "Reaching under the seat," he said, repeating the phrase with the neutral precision of a man reading coordinates from a map. "Defense Exhibit C is the official vehicle inventory report completed by your partner, Officer Sean Doyle, immediately following my arrest. The report documents every item found in the vehicle. It includes a grocery receipt from Crestwood Food Mart, a portable phone charger, a library book 11 days overdue, and an umbrella." He set the exhibit on the clerk's desk. "There is nothing documented from under the driver's seat, because there was nothing there. Officer Britten." He submitted the exhibit without looking at Whitfield. She had stopped objecting. She had her elbow on the table and her hand over her mouth. "Defense Exhibit D," Marcus continued, "is the medical intake assessment from Crestwood Regional Hospital at 2:17 on the morning of October 20th. The attending physician documents a dislocated left shoulder taser contact burns on the upper back and a 2.4 centimeter laceration on the left cheekbone, consistent with contact with asphalt." He placed the exhibit with the clerk. "There is no documentation of any injury to you, Officer Britten. No report of the shove you testified to. No bruising, no contusion, no medical visit. The only person who went to the hospital that night was me." Something in the room shifted. Marcus felt it without looking for it, the particular atmospheric change of a gallery that has crossed from passive observation into active moral engagement. He heard it in the quality of the silence, the way it had densified. "Let me ask you about your record," Marcus said. He picked up the final document. A stapled packet standard paper, the result of a Freedom of Information Act request submitted 7 weeks ago. "In 11 years on the force, you have accrued 17 excessive force complaints. 13 of those complaints involved unarmed black men. 4 resulted in out-of-court civil settlements paid by the city, totaling $780,000 in taxpayer money." Whitfield was on her feet. "Objection. Your Honor. Character evidence. Improper notice. Highly prejudicial. Sustained." Calloway's voice was controlled, but had taken on a quality, a tightening, a compression, that was different from the session's earlier tone. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Webb, the court is concerned with the events of October 19th. Understood, Your Honor," Marcus said. And then, with the calm of someone who understood exactly what he was doing, he let it go. He did not push. He did not argue, because 17 was already in the room. It would stay there regardless of the ruling. It was sitting in the memory of every person present, in Patricia Odom's hands pressed flat against her thighs, in the young men across the aisle who had exchanged a glance when the number landed in Judge Calloway's face, which had not changed expression, but whose stillness had become its own kind of statement. During the FOIA document presentation, Britten had interrupted twice without being recognized by the bench. Calloway had shut him down both times with a single word. Each correction was a small public reduction. The jaw-grinding had gone from controlled to involuntary. Then Marcus did something none of Britten's 17 previous complainants had managed in a courtroom. He finished. He picked up his legal pad. He clicked his pen. He turned from the witness stand and walked back toward his table with the simple, unhurried movement of someone whose business in a particular direction has concluded. He did not deliver a summation. He did not look over his shoulder. He did not give Cole Britten the thing Britten needed most in that moment, the continued acknowledgement of his existence as a force worth reckoning with. Later, people who were in courtroom 7 that morning would describe the moment differently depending on where they had been sitting. Patricia Odom would say it was the quietest thing she had ever watched happen in a loud room. Bailiff Rick Garrison would say it was like watching someone close a book on a chapter that didn't deserve its length. The elderly man in the windbreaker, who had woken up during the ATM footage and had not looked away since, would say he was not entirely sure what he had witnessed, but that it had made a large man's face do something he had never seen a face do before. What Marcus had done was the most complete act of dismissal available to a person in a room with another person. He had found Britten no longer worth the direction of his attention. He had demonstrated this in front of a gallery, a court stenographer, a judge, and a recording device on the county system. To a man who had controlled every encounter of consequence in his professional life for 11 years, who had decided who stepped out of their car and who went home, who got handcuffed and who got a warning, who went to the hospital, and whose file got closed in 11 days being turned away from, was not an insult. It was an erasure. The jaw-grinding stopped. Britten's face went very flat and very still. And then something behind his eyes made a decision that no part of his conscious mind was running. His hands released the witness box rail. He stood. Whitfield saw it before anyone else. She opened her mouth. Judge Calloway's gavel came down. Neither sound mattered. Britten went over the witness box rail with the momentum of a man who had stopped calculating entirely. His boots hit the courtroom floor. He crossed the distance in 4 strides, heavy direct aimed at Marcus's back, both hands coming up and forward toward his neck. He covered the entire floor before Garrison's hand reached his radio. Marcus did not turn around. He had tracked Britten's movement from the moment the man's weight shifted on the witness box rail. The creak of the wood, one long loaded creak rather than a series of adjustments, which meant rising rather than settling. The displacement of air in a room with a particular acoustic profile. The cadence of boot strikes on linoleum, accelerating across a short distance with a forward weight distribution that told him everything about intent. He had measured it all through the same passive perceptual architecture that had kept him functional in environments where missing these signals meant dying. Crestwood County Superior Courthouse was not a threat environment by any metric he had previously operated against. Every piece of equipment he had spent years building was fully operational regardless. When Britten's hands came within range less than 12 inches from the back of Marcus's neck, Marcus moved. He dropped his center of gravity 6 inches and pivoted left on his heel in one connected motion. The pivot and the drop, simultaneous, rather than sequential, which was what made it faster than a human eye could comfortably follow. His left hand came up and captured Britten's right wrist at the exact moment it arrived. Not a grab, a lock. Fingers closing with a pressure that communicated precisely one thing: this is finished now. He stepped outside Britten's forward momentum, not resisting it, but using it, redirecting 230 pounds of forward force along a rotational path that Britten's body had no vocabulary to correct for. Britten's arm rotated inward and upward past its natural anatomical range. The elbow joint entered hyperextension, a white consuming pressure that Britten would later describe as feeling like his arm was being unscrewed. Marcus stepped in and took the leg, hooking his left foot around Britten's right ankle and unweighting him in one clean sweep. There was a sound when Britten hit the floor, not a thud, a resonance, the kind that moved through the floorboards and into the legs of every chair in the gallery and into the feet of every person sitting in them. It was the sound of something substantial and previously vertical, becoming horizontal against its will and without recourse. Marcus's knee settled at the base of Britten's skull with the precision of someone who had spent years understanding exactly what pressure accomplished, exactly what outcome, and who had no interest in applying more than the minimum required. His grip on Britten's arm was absolute, the shoulder, elbow, and wrist locked simultaneously in a submission position that communicated physically and without ambiguity the end of the engagement. Britten tried to thrash. 3 involuntary spasms. Then his nervous system delivered the message, and he stopped. Marcus's cheek pressed against the linoleum of courtroom 7. From this angle, from the angle of the floor, he could see the shoes of the gallery's nearest row. Worn flats, scuffed work boots, the cheap sneakers of young men who had come to this room afraid. The orange lanyard of Patricia Odom's grocery store badge hanging down from the bench edge. These were the shoes of people who had spent years being told they were wrong about this room and what it did to them. People whose complaints had been closed in 11 days without a witness interview. People who had arrived this morning expecting nothing better than what they always got. Britten had put many of them here in this specific posture, looking up at the fluorescent lights from the floor of their own lives. He had never once been required to understand what it felt like. The courtroom was in pandemonium. The gallery was on its feet. ADA Whitfield had knocked her legal pad to the floor. Bailiff Rick Garrison had his sidearm half-drawn, aimed approximately at the tangle of bodies on the linoleum, which meant aimed approximately at Britten as much as at Marcus, which was a problem that needed immediate management. Bailiff Marcus said. His voice had not changed in volume or quality from the cross-examination. It was the same measured, unhurried tone, the voice of a man for whom the current situation was within the range of things he had prepared for, and whose preparation was adequate. Lower your weapon. I am performing a citizen's arrest on Officer Cole Britten for aggravated assault committed in open court. My knee is applying non-lethal compliance pressure. If he maintains stillness, no injury will occur to his cervical region. If you discharge your weapon from your current position, the trajectory presents a significant risk to the man on the floor. I need you to hold before you do anything. Garrison's hand trembled. His eyes moved from Marcus to Britten to Marcus. Order Judge Calloway's voice arrived in the room with the quality of a single clear frequency, cutting through interference, not loud, not performative, simply correct. She was on her feet. Garrison, drop the weapon. Now. Garrison holstered. His hands were shaking. Mr. Webb. Calloway's voice went to its controlled register. Release him, with respect. Your Honor. Not yet. Marcus kept his eyes on the judge. His knee did not shift. Officer Britten remains armed with a Glock 19, a department taser, and OC spray. He has just demonstrated severe emotional instability and violent intent in a public courtroom. Releasing him before he is disarmed by another sworn officer presents a calculable and unnecessary threat to every person in this room. I am not willing to make that choice without flagging it clearly to the bench first. Britten made a sound beneath him, a low, pressurized groan, compressed by the weight of the situation and the compliance pressure on his neck. My arm, he managed. You're going to break it. Then don't move. Bradley. Marcus said, using the first name with the quiet, absolute finality of a man issuing a command he expects to be followed. Not cruelty. Statement of fact. Judge Calloway looked at Garrison. Disarm him. Carefully. Now. Garrison approached, knelt, and with hands that had not stopped trembling, unclipped the duty belt in its entirety. The Rig Glock taser radio OC canister handcuff case slid across the linoleum toward the far wall. Garrison straightened and stepped back. Marcus released Britten's arm in one controlled motion, withdrew his knee and stood up. He stepped back 3 paces. He smoothed the front of his $62 jacket. He brushed a small amount of linoleum dust from the left knee of his trousers. He looked briefly at Britten struggling to his feet, clutching his right elbow. Face crimson and mottled eyes producing something that was fury. But also Marcus could see the first real fear the man had felt in a professional context in 11 years. Then Marcus looked away from Britten, because Britten on the floor was no longer the most important thing in the room. Your Honor, Marcus said. He addressed the bench with the same composed clarity he had maintained throughout. As a victim of an unprovoked assault committed in open court, and as a citizen whose constitutional rights have been violated in a manner that substantially predates today's proceedings, I would like to invoke my right to make one phone call. Calloway stared at him. Something was shifting behind her expression, the reassessment that comes from encountering a situation for which existing categories are insufficient. Mr. Webb, you are not the one under arrest. Officer Britten is in contempt of this court, and I am referring his conduct immediately to the District Attorney's Office and Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs won't be necessary, Your Honor. Marcus reached into his inner breast pocket. He withdrew a phone. Matte black compact, the casing reinforced at the corners. The antenna configuration different from any consumer device in the room. Because I am not, in fact, a private citizen today, and this was not, in fact, just a traffic stop. He dialed a number from memory. He lifted the phone to his ear. Control, this is Chief Webb. Authentication. Alpha Sierra Niner. Target has self-incriminated on the official court record. Physical assault on federal operative confirmed and captured on county recording. Proceed with Phase 3. He listened for 4 seconds. He nodded once. He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket. The courtroom was so quiet that when ADA Whitfield's pen rolled off the edge of her table and struck the floor, 3 people in the gallery flinched. Judge Ruth Calloway had presided over Courtroom 7 for 19 years. She had managed a murder trial in which the defendant's own attorney broke down in closing. She had handled gang indictments that required expanded courtroom capacity, corporate fraud proceedings that produced document volumes requiring a dedicated storage room, and a wrongful death case in which the plaintiff's family had to be escorted out 4 separate times across 3 days. She had seen confessions come apart on the stand, seen evidence reverse the moral character of a case in a single exhibit, seen people reveal themselves in this room in ways that changed the nature of what justice meant for a particular afternoon. She had never watched a pro se defendant perform a citizen's arrest on a testifying police officer and then make what appeared to be a tactical communication on a military-grade encrypted satellite device. Mr. Webb. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was managing a situation for which she had no direct precedent, going very quiet, very precise. The controlled delivery of someone who was not going to allow the room's chaos to set the terms of what happened next. I demand to know who you just called and what is occurring in my courtroom. You are on an extremely narrow ledge with respect to contempt, and I need you to step back from it immediately and explain yourself, Your Honor. Marcus approached the bench, both hands open at his sides, nothing held, nothing concealed. He stopped at a respectful distance. I apologize for the disruption. Officer Britten introduced an element that was not part of the operational plan. The remainder of this will proceed in an orderly manner. He reached into his briefcase. He withdrew a sealed manila envelope and set it on the judge's bench. My name is Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb of the United States Navy SEALs. I am deployed today as a deep cover operative under a joint task force consisting of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. That envelope contains a sworn affidavit from Special Agent Diane Okafor of the FBI Public Corruption Unit, along with an Attorney General's Office mandate authorizing my deployment and the scope of the operation. I would ask Your Honor to break the seal. The gallery produced a sound, not a gasp. Something more compressed than that, a collective intake of breath held rather than released. Ada Whitfield had risen. Your Honor, the state had no knowledge of any federal task force investigation involving this defendant or this case. If there is an active federal, that's precisely why your office had no knowledge, Ms. Whitfield. Marcus turned to address her directly. His tone held no antagonism, only the flat accuracy of a statement of record. The investigation identified your office as having dismissed, misrouted, or declined to pursue 22 excessive force complaints against Officer Britten over the past 3 years. The relationship between the district attorney's office and the 3rd Precinct made it operationally impossible to trust that any information shared with your office would remain protected. Whitfield's mouth opened. She sat down. Marcus turned back to the bench. For 14 months, the FBI and the DOJ have been investigating the Crestwood Metro Police Department's 3rd Precinct for a coordinated pattern of civil rights violations, unlawful detentions, and illegal asset seizure. Officer Britten and his partner, Officer Sean Doyle, were identified as the primary architects of a shakedown operation targeting black residents in the Millbrook and Greenvale districts. He paused. The vehicle I was driving on the night of October 19th was not a standard lease. It was a federally rigged bait car, 4 concealed high-definition recording devices, biometric contact sensors on the steering wheel, and a direct encrypted uplink to an FBI surveillance unit stationed 3 blocks from the stop location. That unit recorded the entire encounter in real time. He looked at Britten. Britten's disarmed arm clutched against his chest had gone very still near the gallery railing. The rage in his face had not disappeared, but had been overlaid by something else, the dawning arithmetic of a man counting what he had just walked into. We needed to establish that Officer Britten's behavior was not reactive, Marcus continued, not a response to perceived threat. We needed to demonstrate that he was not pulling people over because of traffic violations. He was targeting residents based on race and on the appearance of economic success in neighborhoods he had designated as his operational territory. The bait car gave us that documentation beyond any threshold of legal dispute. He stopped. He didn't pull me over because I ran a red light, Your Honor. He pulled me over because he saw a black man in a good car on Millbrook Avenue, and 11 years of unchallenged behavior did the rest. Britten lurched off the railing. He's lying. This is fabricated. Judge, you cannot allow this man to stand in your courtroom, and you will be silent. Calloway's voice arrived with the absolute finality of a structure bearing weight. She did not raise it. She did not need to. She pointed at Britten with one finger. You have assaulted a man in my courtroom. You will not speak again unless I address you directly, or Garrison will have you in the holding room downstairs before you finish the sentence. Am I understood? Britten's mouth closed. He looked like a man whose mouth was the last thing he still controlled, and had just been informed he was losing that too. Calloway broke the seal on the manila envelope. She read for 2 minutes. The room waited. The court stenographer's fingers were motionless. The 2 young men from the morning docket were pressed against the back wall of the gallery, their mothers beside them, all 4 of them, watching with the full attention of people who had arrived expecting a routine Tuesday and found themselves inside something they would spend years describing. Patricia Odom at the end of the row was not looking at Britten or at Marcus or at the judge. She was looking at the exhibit on the clerk's desk. The ATM footage still frozen on the monitor. Britten's figure caught mid-reach through the open door of Marcus's car. She had filed her complaint 5 years ago. She had received a letter 18 months later informing her the case was closed. She had never received an explanation. She was looking at the frame on the monitor the way a person looks at evidence that they were not wrong, that they were never wrong, that the system that told them to doubt themselves was the thing that had been incorrect this entire time. When Calloway finished reading, she set the document on the bench. She removed her glasses. She looked at Marcus with an expression that had moved past anger at the intrusion and arrived somewhere more complicated, the specific recognition that one person gives another who has done something costly and precise because the institution that was supposed to do it had failed to. Continue, she said. Before Marcus could speak again, the heavy rear doors of courtroom 7 swung open. They opened without drama, the controlled, purposeful movement of people who had been monitoring a live audio feed in a hallway and had just received the signal they were positioned for. 5 people in dark suits entered in a close formation. FBI credentials displayed at chest height. They moved down the center aisle without pausing, without theater, at the pace of a team that had rehearsed this moment and found no need to perform it. The woman leading this formation was tall, with close-cropped natural hair, and a quality of stillness that Marcus recognized immediately, the stillness of someone for whom stillness was a professional discipline, rather than an accident of temperament. She was in her mid-40s, charcoal jacket, the expression of a person who was entirely at ease with the gravity of what she was doing. Special Agent Diane Okafor reached the swinging gate, held her credentials to Calloway without breaking stride, and came through. "Your Honor, I apologize for the intrusion into your proceedings. We were monitoring the live feed from Chief Webb's covert wire and moved to enter when the assault on a federal operative was confirmed on the county record." She looked at Britten, one direct assessing look, then returned her attention to the bench. "I have here a federal warrant package for the arrest of Officer Cole Britten." She placed a document on the bench. "Charges include deprivation of rights under color of law in violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 242, aggravated assault on a federal task force operative, perjury, and obstruction of justice." Britten's breathing had become audible from across the room. "Your Honor," Okafor continued, "while Officer Britten was providing his testimony in this room this morning, a separate FBI unit simultaneously executed a search warrant on the 3rd Precinct's evidence locker. They recovered the following: dashcam footage from Officer Britten's vehicle, flagged for deletion from the department's server, but not yet permanently purged. 3 unregistered burner phones in a sealed container in the section of the locker designated to Britten's unit number, and $41,000 in physical currency unlogged in a waterproofed case. The gallery's silence had become a specific kind of silence. Not the silence of shock, which is temporary and gives way to noise, but the silence of comprehension, which tends to deepen. Additionally, Okafor said, Officer Britten's partner, Sean Doyle, was taken into federal custody at his residence at 9:15 this morning, concurrent with the opening of this session. He provided a full voluntary statement at 9:37 a.m., 22 minutes. Marcus had projected 30. Doyle's statement details an operation the officers referred to internally as the Millbrook Rate, a coordinated cash extraction system targeting residents of the Millbrook and Greenvale districts through pretextual traffic stops. Residents were detained without legal basis, their vehicles searched without consent, and cash found during those searches was confiscated under claims of suspected drug proceeds. None of the confiscations were logged through the proper civil forfeiture reporting process. The funds were distributed among 4 officers and routed through a business entity registered to a family member of Doyle's who had no knowledge of its purpose. She paused. The pause was precise, the pause of someone who has held a final piece of information until the moment when the room is prepared to receive it. Doyle also confirmed that the controlled substances found in the vehicle of a Crestwood State University student named Terrence Gray 14 months ago, substances that produced a conviction and a 4-year prison sentence, were placed in Gray's vehicle by Officer Britten during a pretextual stop. The narcotics, per Doyle's statement, originated from an evidence bag that Britten had checked out of the precinct locker for a listed training demonstration 6 weeks prior and never returned. The air in the room changed in a way that was physical, not metaphorical. It was as though the temperature had dropped and the pressure had increased simultaneously. Judge Calloway set down the document she was holding. She looked at Britten with the expression of a woman who had sentenced people in this room for 19 years and had always understood it as a professional obligation, a function of the role, something the law required of her, rather than something she required of herself. This was different. This was someone who had used her courtroom, who had sat in her witness box and sworn on a Bible and delivered practiced lies to her face, to send an innocent college student to prison for 4 years. "Is this true, Officer Britten?" she said. Her voice had weight in it that she did not manufacture. Have you been using this court to imprison innocent people to cover your own criminal operation? Britten said nothing. He was gripping his injured elbow. His face was the color of something that had been left out too long. His jaw had stopped moving entirely. The performance, the authority, the practiced composure, the air of a man for whom this room was his natural habitat, had been removed from him, layer by layer, across the last hour. And what remained underneath was not what he wanted anyone to see. His knees went. Okafor's two agents caught him by the arms before he reached the floor. He slumped between them, not unconscious, not fully present, producing a sound that was barely a sound, a compressed, involuntary noise of someone experiencing a quantity of consequence that exceeded their preparation for it. Marcus watched this happen. He felt no satisfaction. He had known since the operation's architecture was finalized that this moment would come, and he had prepared himself for the emotional reality of witnessing it in a way that left no room for exultation. He thought about Darnell's fellowship email, unread in a cup holder on Millbrook Avenue at 11:15 on a Tuesday, waiting to be something wonderful. He thought about Darnell's face in the hospital, careful and diminished, saying these things happen, and what it had cost his brother to say that. What it had cost to keep saying it for 6 months while nothing happened, and the IAD file sat closed, and the system that was supposed to adjudicate this had other priorities. He thought about Terrence Gray, currently in the second year of a 4-year sentence for drugs that Britten had placed in his car. He thought this is what the Millbrook rate actually cost, not the $41,000. This, Agent Okafor Marcus said quietly without drama. The secondary objective. Secured Chief Webb. Okafor met his eyes directly. Forensic auditors began their review of the 3rd Precinct's civil forfeiture records at 7 this morning. They have identified $2.3 million in seized assets over 6 years that cannot be traced to any criminal conviction. Deputy Chief Warren Holt, who administered the IAD review that closed the complaint file related to your brother 14 months ago, his bank records have been formally subpoenaed. His phone records show 14 direct contacts with Officer Britten in the 9 days preceding the closure of that review. 14 calls, 11 days, no witness interviews. The math of a protection that had been purchased at the price of a young man's orbital socket and a fellowship email that was never going to be read in the same way it would have been read that night. Ada. Whitfield raised her hand, a small, careful gesture, like a person in a meeting who has waited for the appropriate moment and is not entirely sure it has arrived. Agent Okafor, I want it on the record that this office had no knowledge of and no participation in any of the conduct described. I am prepared to offer full cooperation with the federal investigation. Okafor looked at her. We know, Ms. Whitfield. Your office will be contacted Monday. Calloway straightened. She had been absorbing for several minutes. Now she picked up her gavel. Agent Okafor, proceed with the arrest. Okafor nodded to the 2 agents holding Britten upright. One of them reached for his standard-issue handcuffs. Wait, Marcus said. The word was quiet. It stopped the room anyway. He walked to the bailiff's table. He picked up Britten's duty belt, the full rig, sitting where Garrison had placed it. He unclipped the handcuff case. He removed the cuffs inside standard department-issue Cole Britten's own and carried them to the waiting agent. He held them out. No statement. No explanation. No ceremony. The agent took them. He understood. He moved Britten's arms behind his back without gentleness and ratcheted the cuffs closed. Click. Click. The sound was precise and final. It was Britten's own instrument for 11 years applied to people who had done nothing, turned at last in the correct direction. It was the sound of a particular equation coming into balance. Walk him out, Okafor said. Britten was walked up the center aisle of courtroom 7, past the swinging gate, past the prosecution's table where Whitfield sat with her hands folded, past the gallery, Patricia Odom, the young men and their mothers, the elderly man in the windbreaker, who was watching with the bright, specific attention of someone receiving information he had been waiting a long time to receive. The heavy oak doors opened. Britten's figure passed through them, shoulders bent, steps mechanical, the sounds of a man being escorted out of the last room that had been his. The doors closed. The sound of his voice, whatever he had been saying, cut off with the latch. Courtroom 7 was quiet. Judge Calloway looked at Marcus. He was standing at the defense table, his cheap briefcase on the floor beside him, his legal pad closed on the table surface. He looked like a man who had completed a long and meticulous piece of work and was allowing himself for the first time in hours to simply stand still. Mr. Webb, Calloway said. The anger in her face had been replaced by something she did not typically allow to be visible from the bench, a respect that was direct and unguarded. All charges against you are dismissed with extreme prejudice, effective immediately. I am ordering a comprehensive judicial review of every conviction in Crestwood County in which Cole Britten served as the primary arresting officer. Ms. Whitfield, your office will cooperate fully, or I will hold District Attorney Caldwell personally in contempt. Am I understood? Yes, Your Honor, completely. Calloway looked at Marcus one more time. You are free to go, Chief Webb. And on behalf of this court, I am sorry that this required you to do it yourself. I am sorry the system that was supposed to handle this made instead a man who had already given enough go and volunteer to be bait in his own brother's case. Marcus picked up his briefcase. He straightened his jacket. He walked through the swinging gate and out of courtroom 7 at the same unhurried pace he had entered it 3 hours ago, giving nothing away in either direction. The elevator to the lobby smelled of burned coffee and floor polish. He rode it alone. He thought about Darnell. The full scope of what Cole Britten had constructed took 10 days to surface completely, and what surfaced was consistently worse than what the FBI had projected going in. The Millbrook rate, the name Doyle had used in his statement, delivered in the clipped, relieved cadence of a man who had been holding it for too long, was not informal. It was structured with defined roles and consistent methodology maintained over 6 years. Britten was the enforcement arm. Doyle processed the money. Desk Sergeant Gary Purcell managed evidence locker access and record alterations on nights the operation ran. A fourth officer named Dennis Trask worked as a perimeter monitor scanning dispatch frequencies to ensure no supervisory units would appear. All 4 were indicted within 10 days. The forensic audit conducted by Kroll Associates under DOJ contract traced $2.3 million in civil forfeiture proceeds over 6 years that had never passed through proper reporting channels. The money moved through a shell corporation registered in Delaware in the name of a relative of Doyle's who had no knowledge of its existence through 2 intermediate accounts and ended in a vacation property in South Carolina, 3 investment accounts, and 2 vehicles distributed among the 4 officers and Deputy Chief Warren Holt. Holt had not participated in the street-level operations. His function was simpler and far more consequential. He had ensured that when complaints landed on his desk, they stayed there. Of the 22 excessive force complaints against Britten that Whitfield's office had not pursued, 17 had also crossed Holt's desk at Internal Affairs. 12 had been closed without a single witness interview. 5 had been closed with interviews documented in the case management system that when federal investigators recontacted the original complainants had never actually occurred. Patricia Odom was one of those 5. When the federal investigator called her at home to inform her that her 5-year-old complaint was being reopened as part of a federal civil rights investigation and that the interview recorded in her file had been fabricated, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew that. I knew it the whole time." And then she said nothing else for several seconds. And the investigator who had made the call noted in her report that the silence was the kind that followed something that had needed to be said for a very long time. 31 convictions secured with Britten as primary arresting officer were flagged for judicial review. The Crestwood State University Law School clinical program had 17 attorneys, volunteer their services within 48 hours of the announcement. Each flagged case was assigned a reviewing attorney by the end of the week. The case that moved fastest was not the most legally complex of the 31. It was the most human. Terrence Gray was 19 years old when Britten stopped his vehicle on a Tuesday evening 14 months before the events of Courtroom 7. He was a sophomore at Crestwood State studying electrical engineering with a GPA that had earned him a letter of recognition from his department chair at the end of the previous semester. He had received confirmation that same afternoon of his acceptance to a summer research fellowship in Atlanta, a program he had applied to twice before without success. He was driving home to tell his mother. He never made it. The stop lasted 11 minutes. At its end, Britten documented the discovery of controlled substances in the trunk. Gray was arrested, held without bail for 3 weeks, assigned a public defender carrying 63 active cases, and advised to accept a plea agreement. He did. He was 20 years old when he entered Crestwood Correctional. He had been there for 14 months when Doyle's statement identified the narcotics as coming from Britten's evidence bag. The ballistics and chemical chain of custody analysis commissioned by federal investigators confirmed the impossibility of the documented chain of evidence within 7 days. A federal judge signed Gray's release order on the 8th day. Terrence Gray walked out of Crestwood Correctional on a Tuesday morning, 14 months and some days after he had walked in. The law clinic was there. His mother was there. She had driven 3 hours in a car with a check engine light that had been on for 18 months. She'd had the money to fix it once, and then legal fees had consumed it, and she held her son in the parking lot of that facility for a very long time. Several people who were nearby found reasons to look elsewhere, and then found they couldn't, and then stopped trying. The photograph appeared on the front page of the Crestwood Ledger the following morning. It ran in 11 other papers within a week. By the time it appeared on a national news broadcast, Terrence Gray had already spoken to a civil rights law firm about the wrongful conviction settlement had re-enrolled at Crestwood State for the following semester, and had called the Research Fellowship Program in Atlanta. The program director told him his spot had been noted and held open. The DOJ's consent decree on the Crestwood Metro Police Department was the most comprehensive the agency's regional office had issued in 14 years. Body cameras were mandated across all precincts with real-time upload to a server accessible to a newly established civilian oversight board. That oversight board was granted full subpoena authority, the authority that community advocates had been formally requesting for 9 consecutive years. The 3rd precinct was placed under direct federal monitoring for 5 years. Officer hiring, promotion, and disciplinary decisions were subject to quarterly federal review. Warren Holt was brought before a federal grand jury 6 weeks after Britten's arrest, facing the weight of the phone records, the financial audit, and 5 fabricated interview documents in case files that bore his sign-off. His attorney entered a guilty plea to obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. He received 7 years. His pension was revoked. The Internal Affairs Division he had administered was dissolved. In its place, an independent review office was established and staffed exclusively by personnel with no prior history of employment with the Crestwood Metro PD. Marcus filed his operational debrief with Agent Okafor 48 hours after the courtroom in a meeting room at a federal building 20 miles from Crestwood. He answered every question fully and without editorializing, and was done in 2 hours. When the debrief concluded, Okafor shook his hand. "That required a particular kind of patience," she said. "Most people couldn't have held the line in that room for as long as you did without it showing." "I had good reasons," Marcus said. He drove from the federal building directly to Crestwood Regional Medical Center. Darnell was on a volunteer shift in the neurology ward. Marcus found him on the 4th floor in a hallway, holding a clipboard, with the organized focus he brought to everything, the same quality he had applied to study groups, lab applications, and 14 months of quietly rebuilding what that Tuesday night on Millbrook had taken from him. He had a white volunteer badge on his scrub pocket and was reading a patient chart with his head at the slightly tilted angle of someone who was genuinely interested in what the page said. He looked up when Marcus appeared at the far end of the hallway. He went still in the way that people who know each other very well go still when they read something significant in the other person's face before a word has been spoken. Marcus walked the length of the hallway and stopped 2 feet from his brother. He told him everything, cleanly in order without ornamentation. The sting, the courtroom, the GPS data, and the ATM footage, and the exhibits landing one at a time. The phone call, the arrest, Doyle's statement at 9:37, Gray's release order, Holt's impending indictment, and then last, because he had saved this for last, the IAD file, the fabricated interview entries, the 14 calls between Holt and Britten in the 9 days before Darnell's complaint was closed without a witness interview. Darnell listened without speaking. His face moved through something that was not a single emotion, but a sequence of them arriving faster than they could be processed. Recognition. Grief. A complicated species of relief that was not simple enough to be called relief, and something beneath all of that had no clean name. Something that had been accumulating for 6 months in the space between these things happen, and the knowledge held privately and carefully that they did not have to. When Marcus finished, Darnell was quiet for a long time. Around them, the hallway continued its hospital hallway life, the soft roll of a medication cart, the electronic chime of a call button being answered somewhere, the muffled PA system doing its quiet work of directing people toward the places they needed to be. "Are you hurt?" Darnell said. "No." Darnell nodded, slowly. The nod of a person receiving something that is arriving at a speed their internal machinery was not designed to process cleanly. "Gray is out," he said. "Gray is out." Darnell looked at the far end of the hallway for a while. His clipboard was at his side. His jaw healed, now reconstructed with surgical hardware that would be visible on any X-ray for the rest of his life, was set in an expression trying to be neutral and not entirely getting there. "I told you it was fine," he said quietly. "That day on the phone. I said, 'Don't do anything, Marcus.' I know. I meant it. I know you did." Darnell looked at his brother. "But you did it anyway." "Yeah." Another silence. Darnell looked down at the clipboard, then up at the fluorescent light above them, then back at Marcus. And then something shifted in his face, not resolved, but repositioned. The specific movement of a person who has been carrying a weight in a particular posture for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down and look at it from the outside from a distance where the full shape of it is visible. "The fellowship," Darnell said. "The one from Atlanta. The one I never opened." "Yeah. I found out last month they ran it again this year. Applications open in March." Marcus looked at him. "I'm going to apply," Darnell said. It was not a declaration. It was a statement of something already decided, delivered quietly. "I'm going to get it this time." They stood in the hospital hallway for a while after that. They didn't say anything else. There was nothing else that needed to be said with words. A brother had been broken by a system that was supposed to protect him, and had instead protected the man who broke him. And another brother had spent 7 months walking into the center of that system, wearing a $62 suit and carrying a legal pad and a federal mandate, and the particular patience of someone who had operated in places where patience was not a virtue, but a survival skill, and who had been absolutely clear-eyed from the beginning about what he was doing and why. It had cost something. The thing that costs is never the physical part. 18 months after the events of Courtroom 7, the federal courthouse in downtown Crestwood was at capacity for the first time in years. The press pool occupied the back 2 rows. A court artist sat to the right of the gallery. 3 national outlets were recording the audio feed under court order. Cole Britten's defense attorney had entered a guilty plea 6 weeks earlier, after reviewing the discovery package and spending 2 days with its contents, before calling his client and saying very directly that a trial was not a viable strategy, given the nature and volume of the evidence. The sentencing hearing was procedurally a formality. In human terms, it was the last room Britten would walk into as a free man. He was diminished. This was the word the Crestwood Ledger's courthouse reporter would use the following morning, and it was accurate. He had lost 22 pounds. His suit was the kind worn by a person dressing for a courtroom appearance without access to their regular wardrobe. His attorney sat beside him with the careful blank expression of a man who had discharged his professional obligation and was now present only for the conclusion of something he could not prevent. Darnell Webb's victim impact statement was read aloud by the federal prosecutor because Darnell had submitted it in writing and chosen not to attend the hearing. He had written it over 3 evenings in his apartment at the desk where his medical school textbooks were stacked, and his application materials for the Atlanta Fellowship were organized in a folder he checked every few days to make sure everything was in order. The statement was 4 pages. It described the night of the stop, the textbooks on the passenger seat, the unread email in the cup holder, the window already down before the door was opened. It described the hospital. It described the 6 weeks of missed coursework and the lab group that had reorganized itself without him and had not reorganized itself back. It described the specific quality of the fear that had taken up residence in him in the months after, the way he checked his mirrors differently, now the way his shoulders tightened when red and blue light appeared in glass anywhere near him, the way he had learned to calculate certain routes based on variables that had nothing to do with traffic. It described what it meant to file a complaint and be told by every subsequent official silence that what had happened to him was within the acceptable parameters of how the world worked. The prosecutor paused twice while reading it. 2 people in the gallery covered their faces. The sentencing judge reviewing Calloway's written statement, Okafor's full operational report, and Darnell's letter, sentenced Cole Britten to 18 years in federal penitentiary without possibility of parole. Pension stripped. Law enforcement certification permanently revoked. Britten heard the sentence with the stillness of someone for whom the concept of response had temporarily become unavailable. He did not speak. He did not cry. His attorney placed a hand briefly on his arm and then withdrew it. 2 federal marshals approached from behind. Terrence Gray walked out of Crestwood Correctional on a Tuesday morning, 14 months into a 4-year sentence he had not deserved. The law clinic was there. His mother was there. He stood in the parking lot in civilian clothes and blinked at the open sky with the expression of a person reintroducing themselves to a world that had continued without them and was now with some effort making room. He returned to Crestwood State the following semester. He called the research fellowship in Atlanta. The program director told him his spot had been noted and held. He would be there in June. Patricia Odom received a letter from the city of Crestwood, informing her that her complaint from 5 years ago had been substantiated as part of the federal investigation, and that she was entitled to a civil settlement review. She folded the letter and put it in the kitchen drawer, where she kept important documents, and then stood at her kitchen counter for a while, not doing anything in particular. Later, she called her sister and told her about it, and her sister said, "I told you, Patty. I told you from the beginning you weren't wrong." And Patricia said yes. She knew that she had always known that, and somehow, knowing it had not made the 5 years shorter. The Civilian Oversight Board, the one community advocates had been requesting for 9 years, held its first meeting on a Tuesday morning in November. The board had full subpoena authority. Its members had no prior employment history with the Crestwood Metro PD. They began with a backlog of 47 cases. Marcus did not attend Cole Britten's sentencing. He was on a naval base in North Carolina, running a hand-to-hand combat qualification course for a new selection class, 23 and 24-year-olds. The age Darnell was now the age Marcus had been, when he first learned that patience was not the opposite of action, but its most advanced form. He was running them through a controlled scenario when his phone vibrated twice in his jacket pocket. At the end of the exercise, when the candidates were in debrief, he stepped outside the training building and stood in the November air and read Agent Okafor's text, 18 years. No parole. Holt pled. Gray is home. Good work, Chief. He read it twice. He stood for a moment, looking at the gray Atlantic, visible at the base's edge. Flat, enormous, indifferent in the specific way of things that have been present long before any of this, and will be present long after. He thought about Darnell in a hospital bed, saying these things happen. He thought about Terrence Gray in a parking lot blinking at the sky. He thought about what accountability actually looked like when it was real. Not a principle, not a speech, not a department memo, but a specific man in a specific room, hearing a specific number that would govern the remainder of his life. Then he went back inside to his candidates. 3 months later, Darnell Webb submitted his application to the Caldwell Institute for Biomedical Research Fellowship in Atlanta. He submitted it at 11:47 on a Tuesday night from the desk in his apartment, where the textbooks were stacked and the acceptance letter from medical school was framed on the wall. Not as decoration, not as a performance of recovery, but because their mother had asked for a copy, and framing it was the easiest solution. He did not tell Marcus he had submitted the application. He would tell him when the answer came back. He kept a photograph of Terrence Gray's release taped to the inside of his cabinet, not as a symbol of anything, but as a reminder of what the law looked like when it worked. One person standing in a parking lot, blinking at the open sky, having done nothing wrong, and finally being in a position where that fact had been officially acknowledged. Darnell thought that was the least the law owed a person. He intended to spend his career in a position where he could argue that case. The cheap gray suit hung in a garment bag in Marcus's apartment closet, still tagged from the discount rack. He had not returned it, and he would not. It had done the work he bought it to do. It had made a man who had spent 11 years choosing his targets see exactly what he wanted to see, right up until the moment the trap closed around him. Somewhere in a federal penitentiary, Cole Britten was beginning to understand what it felt like to occupy a space not of your choosing, and wait out years in a room that had no interest in who you used to be. He had walked into courtroom 7 that Tuesday morning, intending to finalize the destruction of a man he had already half-built a case against. He had walked instead into the one room where the person he chose had been waiting for him, had been building the room around him for 7 months, and was entirely ready. Arrogance is a particular kind of blindness. It does not prevent you from seeing the trap. It makes you incapable of believing that one could ever exist for you. Marcus Webb had walked into that courtroom in a $62 suit with a legal pad and a federal mandate, and the patience of a man who had operated in places where patience was the difference between mission success and not coming home. And he had demonstrated without raising his voice once that a man with genuine authority has no need to perform it, and that a man whose authority was always borrowed meets eventually the moment his credit runs out. If stories like this matter to you, stories of accountability, of patience that outlasts corruption of justice, that finally arrives, please subscribe to our channel. There are more coming, and none of them end quietly.